This time on Backshed, we've got a 1974 HQ Holden Wagon Survivor. So if you saw the HQ in previous episodes, we know it runs. Not well, but it runs. It's clearly leaking fuel out the bottom of the carburetor. And I did pull a couple of these and they're very shitty, which will probably explain why it's only running on about maybe 4 or 5 cylinders. So I think what we'll do to start off, I won't get into washing it just yet because this one doesn't look like it's got a whole heap of rat turds. It's dusty, but I don't see any rat turds. So we'll remove these plugs, we'll clean them up, clean up the ends of them, maybe get that carburetor off. I have got a kit for it, and see if we can't get it to run better before I actually start going washing everything down. So, alright, stop talking, get into it. So I undid these two and cleaned them off, and then went, well, that's brand new, and that's brand new, and so are the others. Might seem like a good thing, but why only 4? Why is there 4 new ones and 2 old corroded ones? I'm wondering if we're going to find, was that why it was running on 4? Are these 2 an issue, or were they trying to find an issue and they put plugs? I guess we'll find out, but for now I'll get that carburetor off. We'll soak him in some fuel, strip him down, and see if we can't get it to at least run a bit better. And I think that pump, you can see in the bottom of that, it's done. So that pump might come off as well. I'll see if I've got one on the shelf that I can use for the interim, but then we might get that guy rebuilt. So one other thing I noticed when I was connecting the battery and winding it before, but these leads were getting quite hot. So what I'll do is I'll undo them down there at the starter, we'll clean up all the terminals, we'll undo that guy, just give them better earth and better positive, and just see if that makes any difference. So terminals all cleaned up. That one was loose, which obviously won't help. And we'll knock this pump off now. 2 reasons. 1, it's leaking oil from the bottom of it. And 2, that's really dry and crusty. So I'll knock that off. I'm certain I'll have another pump. It might not be great, but it'll do while I rebuild that one. Okay, so here's a little twist I didn't expect. I get the pump off, looking at that you go, well, that's going to be shagged. When you actually look at that diaphragm, it's been replaced. It's actually very soft, very flexible. So I would say that was replaced and rebuilt not long before it was parked and all that shit dried up. So if I can clean out the passage for the fuel to come in and out, I reckon that pump will go back on and work. Like, I like small victories, right? But that, you'd swear it was new. Well, if you didn't just watch me take it off, pull it apart, clean it and put it back together, then you'd think it was new. Sort of. Anyway, it's going back on. I'll get down there cleaned up and we'll get some gasket glue on it and bolt him back on. all that added up to about, I don't know, 40 minutes. So that's been soaking for 40 minutes now. So I think we'll start pulling them apart. The reason I do that, and I've caught myself out with this one before, is if you just pull it down, try and clean it up, blow it out, sometimes some of the shit inside them is baked on or dried on that hard that it doesn't soften, it doesn't get time to soften to blow it out with contact cleaner or carby cleaner or whatever. And I've actually had to go back and do it again. So hopefully everything's softened up a bit there, or a little bit. Let's pull it apart. So all these little Strombergs from grey motor right through, they all look pretty similar, but in a nutshell there's a couple of little differences. Say if you're getting one from a swap meter online or something like that, the main difference is the base size. The grey motor has a size, oh actually, rather than tell you, I'll show you. So this little Stromberg on a grey motor, if you put a vernier across the base of the bolts like that, you'll see it is about 64 or 65 mil. Then we'll go to this little rebuilt fella, and this was off for 186, so we put in the other HQ, and you go across the base of this one and we're looking at like 71 mil. And then if you come to the one we're working on, across the base of it, like 76 mil. So the grey was 65, that's off a 186, that'll run right through. I think early HQs had that base as well. That was 71, and this guy, that one being a 74, is the bigger base, and that's 74 or 75 mil, somewhere there, 75-ish mil, maybe 76 actually. But that does pose the question, why don't you just put that one with that base on that motor? Because if that is jetted for say a 186 or something, I just don't want to go rejetting that carburetor, swapping bases and rejetting. That'll be for something else later on down the track. Anyway, I got a kit. Let's stop talking and finish this kit. So you always hear of people saying, oh, they got shit in the carburetor. They're not meaning it in the literal sense of some tiny little animal has got in there and dumped in there. Although we do deal with a lot of rodent shit here. But have a look at this, what's come out of that. I've just turned that upside down and shook that. That's just dried up fuel. That's what will be blocking every little passage and every little orifice in that carburetor. So we'll get this float out and start getting through some of these passages and get him cleaned up. So that's the float out, and take a look in there. That's why they don't run after being sitting, or run very poorly. That would mean the idle circuit on that guy was basically blocked with just that sort of stuff. That's why it probably started and ran when I had the throttle open, but the minute you back off the throttle it'd just die. So I'll get this cleaned up, get him back together. So that's the bowl basically stripped down. All the plugs are removed from the bottom, and you can still see the crap that's inside of there. That's these little plugs. Remove all of them, clean all them up. So carby's back in one piece. let's get it on and see how bad I messed it up. So I've rigged up a sketchy little fuel system. The pump's full, the carburetor's back on, so we'll give it a wind and see if it wants to fire. So that's running. So one way to tell which cylinder's not firing if it's got headers, get a water bottle. So I'll do it with the engine off and you get a better idea because you'll actually be able to hear me. But squirting the headers, see how that one, it's not evaporating as quick. That's telling us that that header is the one, well that's the cylinder that isn't running at the minute or is running poorly at the minute. It's obviously running because it's warm. It's not as warm as the others. So that's running, but it's running on 5. Number 5 cylinder isn't really running that great. It's running because the pipe is hot, but not as hot as the others, as you saw from the squirt can. So what I want to do is actually drop the oil, get some fresh oil through it, and just see if that lifter picks up and it stops chattering, and that might fix the cylinder. The oil is pretty over full, which sort of indicates maybe a bit of old fuel in there or whichever. But the real issue here is it's pissing oil out, like literally running out. I don't know whether it's from the filter, from the pump, or from the filter itself. I haven't been under there while it's running, so I'll move it back because I know this transmission works. So I'll just move it back some so I've got some space, get him up on stands, and then just run it and see where that oil's coming from. So I've cleaned up underneath that filter, around the bottom of the pump, and also that oil sender. But while it's hot, I'm going to dump the oil, and then hopefully that'll sort that lifter out. And how that comes about is when they're sitting for a long time, if there's a valve open, that lifter, because it's under pressure, will bleed down and sometimes stick in the bottom position of the lifter. When it gets hot, hopefully it'll release. Yeah, we'll get some fresh oil through it anyway. Now it'll be a very, very short drive because if you remember, I'm still using a soft drink bottle as a fuel tank. We might try and address this noisy lifter. it's number 5 cylinder for sure, because as I showed you with that pipe, it's running a lot cooler. So I might knock this rocket cover off, air cleaner off, and just check, make sure it's not loose, but I'd say it's a stuck lifter, but we'll see if we can't break him free. So rocket covers off, and it's not super pretty. I did find a couple of other things. First of all, that pipe was on there running across to the booster, so it's a vacuum line. It was basically broken right through, so we've got a vacuum leak there which I'll address, and I touched the temperature gauge and it fell apart. So there's a couple little things like that we'll address. The main one is, let's find out what's going on with this lifter. It's number 5 cylinder, and they don't feel loose. Actually, one of them's open, so we'll just wind him over until those valves are both released, and we'll see what's going on with it, see if there's some clearance there. So I just bumped the motor over so that those valves are both closed, and you see you can twist the push rod, which you should be able to, and there's no lash there. But look at this one, push rod's nice and free, but there's a little tiny bit of lash. I'm going to undo those rockers. These are non-adjustable rockers, which means you don't have to worry about when you're going back on adjusting the right preload. So I can just knock these off in any cycle and then just torque them back down. I'm just going to find out if it's worn in the rocker, but I'm going to take a wild guess and just say that lifter is just depressed and stuck down. But we'll knock that guy off and just look at that first. So both the rockers are off and they're dirty, but they're not worn. So now that that lifter is unloaded, I'm going to try to unstick it, so to speak, to make it pop back up. Actually, the other thing I should do is stick a straight edge across those valves and just make sure that valve's actually closed, because what if it's not this side on the lifter, what if it's that side on the valve? So I might just put a straight edge across them and see if they're pretty level. Hard to tell. All I'm trying to tell there is just if they're at the same height, but I can tell you I don't think they are. Before I go too hard at that lifter, I might actually give that valve a tap. What I mean by giving the valve a tap is just use a dead blow hammer or rubber mallet or something like that, and if they stick just off the seat, like if when the motor was shut off, if that one was compressed, it can build up surface rust around the seat and it'll be staying just off the seat. So I'm going to give them both a tap, and you'll actually hear the difference if that one is stuck open. Second thing I'm going to do is just dribble a little bit of degreaser down the end of the push rod, and that'll sit into the lifter. I'm going to give it 10 minutes, and I'm just going to ever so slightly do the same thing, just tapping on that push rod after we get a bit of degreaser in it, and hopefully if that lifter plunger is stuck down, it might just be enough to break it free and pop it up, and then it fills with oil and we're good to go. So I'll just dribble a bit of degreaser down it. So I'm ever so slightly just going to dribble a little bit of degreaser down the end of that push rod. Now it doesn't matter if it goes down the outside of the push rod or down the center of the push rod, it's still going to find the lifter. So for any of it that's gone down the outside, I just lift him up. I'll give that 15 minutes and I'll give that a bit of a tap. So while we've got a few minutes waiting on that, I'll sort of explain what's going on there. Think of this can as a hydraulic lifter, and inside a hydraulic lifter there's a little plunger, and when the push rod is loaded, it will push down on that plunger, preload. But when the engine's stopped, if that valve is open, eventually the oil will bleed out of that lifter and it will sink. That can then stick the plunger at the bottom of its travel, not in the middle where it operates. And that's the idea behind, get some degreaser down there, give it a bit of a tap and hopefully break it free, break it loose. But anyway, I'll stop talking, we'll get back to it. So I've just cleaned off the pedestals there, that's this section here. I screwed them back down to load the lifters up, and then I've backed them back off and screwed them back down again. Now that, I'm not going to go off too early, but that's a lot better than it was, so we'll see. So it's nowhere near as bad as it was, but it's still ticking, and I'm not seeing a lot of oil come up through the top here. So next point of call, I think, is just change the oil and see if we can get a bit better oil pressure to push through to some of these push rods. And the other thing is, and that leak has decided to show its head again, and it's actually just the pressure sender. That's only for the warning light, so I've got one of them. I'll knock that out. So how do you just happen to have a 202 oil pressure sender? Easy. There's a 202 right there. This one's the original motor out of the white HQ that we swapped out, and there's a sender, so we'll just use that one. So fresh oil's in, I'm just running him, and you'll see how all the push rods are spinning freely, except that guy. I was gonna, and that one's a bit slow, that's the one we just adjusted. He's still ticking away a bit, but I'll just let him run like that. We're starting to see some oil coming out the top of the rocker there. Once they all start doing that and they all start filling those rockers, we know we're getting somewhere. I'll just let him run for 10-15 minutes. I'll just keep turning those push rods. So I've shut that down now, and that was after about 10 minutes of just sitting there idling. I addressed a couple of little vacuum leaks we had while it was idling, and I had a rag propped up here, and I was starting to get some spray all over the rag, so it's starting to spit out the ends of the push rods here. But I'll let him cool now, cool down, maybe fire him up again tomorrow morning and give him another crack. But she hasn't been that well looked after, the old girl. Not to worry, at least it's running on 6 now. Well, it sounds like it's running better. I've got a little exhaust leak on this side, which probably doesn't help the sound of it. Anyway, baby steps. I've got oil everywhere, but I haven't cleaned him yet, so it didn't get hot, which is good. The radiator is leaking. It's actually leaking from the back of this hose. Just there. Thermostat feels like it's opened. There, that's quite warm, so the thermostat's opened. A little fuel leak, I might have to do that up, nip that up a bit tighter. And of course our oil leak stopped now that I've changed out that sender unit, but we're going okay. So all in all, pretty good day. It's now running on 6 cylinders, rebuilt carby's going good, fuel pump's going good. I'd like to actually take it for a quick drive, just maybe slowly build the revs up and get some heat into it. But that transmission is slipping bad from that first little driver had, and it's only low fluid level, but it's clearly got a slow leak underneath it is why the level's low, because there's no drips on the concrete, but the whole transmission is just covered in just gunk. So it's been weeping slowly and dust has stuck to it, and so I'd say tomorrow we'll break out the pressure cleaner and start sort of knocking some dust and some shit off this thing and see what we're actually working with. Maybe start stripping the interior out, and then just leave that motor to heat cycle a couple of times when we're moving around the shed and whatever. Anyway, I guess that's it for today, and I'll see you in the morning. So up early this morning, and we've got a full day ahead of pressure cleaning and stripping out this interior. Gonna get all the door trims out, the seats out, and pressure clean inside the doors, underneath the car. Underneath the car is absolutely terrible for that transmission leak, and just get it back to a blank canvas. I'm a little worried about how much paint's going to come off with the pressure cleaner, because you can basically rub it off with your finger. So by the time I pressure clean it, I'm not sure how much white we're going to have left. Anyway, I'll stop talking. I'll start ripping some of these trims and seats and, well, everything out. She's really complete inside, but just not perfect. Still got the factory radio. Right, we'll get all this shit out, get the doors stripped down. They'll come in handy. They're missing from the front floor, which is good. It allowed it to drain, which it would have been leaking water. It's got a broken window. But fortunately, there's one with it. Oh, here I was saying no rat turds. There's rat turds. So stripping him out, and I've often said cars can be an emotional roller coaster. It's like the highest of yay and then oh, yay, oh. Well, I had a yay in the back when I saw this window's busted, and I found a window in the back. But when I got it out, it's green, whereas all the other glass is clear. So it'd look kind of stupid, one green window. So I'm like, oh, that's a, oh. And I'm thinking, well, now I've got to chase up a window. Until I remove this door trim and see, there's the glass. It's in the bottom of the door, unbroken. Yay! So this is where I drop it and break it and go, oh. Yay! So I'm pulling apart the rear, cleaning out the back, and I pull the seat out. I think, well, it's obviously had a replacement seat. That's different colour and different trim. But when I fold up the back seat, I find, no, it still has its own seat. So that one's just like extra. And she's pretty good too. Real good. I'm digging around in here and cleaning out everywhere, and I reach in the glove box for a big handful of bolts and some other stuff that I really don't want to admit that I know what it is. Turds. But turns out we had middle to upper class rats. They didn't live in the engine bay, they lived in the glove box. So that's pretty much it stripped out, and I can tell you, as far as the floor pan goes, it's probably the best one I've had. There's barely any surface rust, let alone holes, and I'm talking every floor. Don't get me wrong, it's filthy, but rust free, even the back. Even in here, a little bit of surfacey stuff starting there and there, but no holes whatsoever. This is why I like stripping them down. Take a look at this. See the wet line there? And all this shit is just hiding in the bottom of the door. That's old weather strips, and as good as these doors look, under there's not a spot of rust. They won't stay that way if that's what they're trapping in the bottom. So I'm going to go through this thing with the vacuum first, sweep it all up, try and get all the bulk out of it, and then I'm going to hit everything with the pressure cleaner, inside those doors, inside the tailgate, everywhere. Then I'll get him up on stands, and we might get underneath him as well. So this is why these poor old girls rust. I've pulled out all the heavy shit out of the bottom of this door. I've vacuumed in the bottom of this door, and still, look at that, it's damp and it's just fine dirt. So now I'm going to get serious. I'm going to jack him up, knock the wheels off, and I think we'll start with the underside and then work up. But one thing I do want to do first is pull all these molds off. If I can get them all off without losing any paint, I'd be pretty happy. And that way we can just have a nice clean side of the car rather than that shitty old mold. So I'll get them off, and we'll get him up on stands and start washing. So I guess it's time to get wet, and it might sound strange, but I'm actually going to start underneath, because if I start inside, all the rat turds are going to get washed onto the floor, and that's where I'm going to be laying. So I'll get underneath, get all that cleaned down. That transmission is really filthy, and then we'll get into the inside and then the outside. Let's stop talking and get into it. Before I get too carried away, I better remember put a lid on my fuel tank. Once I do get it all washed down, I will drop that tank, and that way at least we can finish off the fuel system, because other than that lifter, he's actually running pretty good. Take a quick look at this. When I took this for a little drive before, I was thinking that brake sounds like it's dragging, maybe a handbrake or whichever. Nah, that's half the neighbour's fence. Just fencing wire wrapped around the drum. Anyway, we'll keep going. Coming up pretty good underneath. We're getting there, slowly but surely. It's coming up pretty clean. Inside the doors are completely pressure cleaned out, and you can just see what's come out of them. It's just red dirt. The tailgate was quite tricky to actually get the dirt out of. It's about 5 hours at the minute. So they're quite clean in the bottom now. And the floors are looking really good. So I've started pulling a few bits and pieces off and just getting ready to do something with the body. And I was cleaning out the plenum, dig my hand in there pulling this out, I found that. Someone's left their old shifter down in the plenum. Well, that was a pretty big day, a good day, but it was a big day. I found a rusty little shifter, 66 cents, and a Lego brick, so that was a good day. And yes, 66 cents. I found a 1 cent piece, but seriously, all pressure cleaned down. I'll probably have to go one more time under the engine and transmission. It was covered in just a smear of oil that attracts dust, which soaks up oil, which attracts more dust. So it was thick. Went from, you know, stinky, dusty, to now it's pressure cleaned down, the seats are clean. It's essentially ready to go back. I got cheeky when I bought it. I saw it had no carpet. I got cheeky and I ordered carpet pretty much straight away. So I've got carpet here ready to go. So as soon as those seats are dry, I can start reassembling the inside. Those floors need nothing. I probably will black them for no reason other to make it look nice, but there's not a pinhole, they are mint. The floors in that car are absolutely mint. I've pressure cleaned out all the doors, and before they go back together, I'll fish all of them. They're so good inside. I'm actually thinking about buying new trims, which I know that's not really my thing, but those trims are pretty bad. I'll sleep on it and see how I go. I'm buying new rubbers. That's my little thing on this one. I'm going to put new door rubbers on it, new Bailey channels, and new weather strips on the outside so we can try and keep that moisture from getting down into the bottoms of those doors. But anyway, top day, I'm filthy. I've earned this. I'll see you in the morning. So this car is amazingly rust free. That is the only rust I'm going to have to deal with for rego. And all I'm going to do is get a bit of panel steel, clean that up, cut a little square, see him over there, mark him out, clean off that panel, cut him out, tack him in. It's that easy. But seriously, it is pretty straightforward. While that's cooling, and I'm just going to go back and tack weld a couple little pinholes in, I will say I'm no bodywork guru. I can get through some rust repairs, but I'm not rolling up a quarter panel out of flat sheet metal or anything like that, like those amazing talented people. But I can give you two tiny tips. Number one, I don't care how many curse words you know, you'll use all of them if you try to weld through paint. So clean the shit off, or surface rust, or body deadener or anything like that. It's got to be clean to be able to weld to it. And often we rush and try and shortcut and just, you know, I'll just tack it. It's not going to weld. It's not going to be a clean weld. It's going to be porous. It's going to be shitty. And the second thing is, warpage is your enemy. Down here, I don't have to worry so much because there's a lot of strength, but if you were, say, going through the middle of a door or something, just tack, move away, tack another one, and just keep checking your edge where the metal comes together. Make sure it's not like that or like that. Make sure it's butted up nice, and just tack, move on, tack, move on, tack, move on. Even if you've got to just nip them down with the grinder in between, because if you just try and run weld, it's just going to suck in and you're going to have a big groove here. You're going to spend a fortune of time. Here I'm lucky, but even there it did start to pull in a bit. That's nearly cool there now. I've got a little ridge just in that corner, so I'll just run back down this front edge. But I'm not going to hide that. I'm going to sand it, put some primer over it. I'm just going to leave it. So I just started working on the paintwork on this guy, and I started sanding the top of the guard, but I honestly think we better have a bit of a chat about this, because the oxidization on this car is so bad that I'm actually going to have to use a coarser grit sandpaper to take the oxidization away. What do I mean by oxidization? It's where the paint breaks down, and if you look, I can literally take paint off just by rubbing it. If you see there, just by rubbing it, you're taking paint away. And so if I sand this with too fine a sandpaper, it's really going to glide over it. It's not going to take the oxidization off, which then makes it difficult for the clear coat to adhere. So when I've sanded the tops of these panels, we're probably going to end up with more primer in these areas right down to here than we have paint, because I've got to go back to a stable base, like I said, something for the clear coat to adhere to. It's not going to stick well to pretty much, if you can see, you just rub your hand over it and all of a sudden you've got oxidization on your fingers. So this side that's heavily affected by the weather, it's going to have some pretty serious patina from the waste molds up. So I expand on that a little. Think of oxidization on the paintwork like sunburn for your skin. It dries out and it starts to peel. That's basically turning to talcum powder. You can see when I pull my thumb down, it's actually pulling some of the white away and exposing more primer. If you went to paint over that, it's essentially painting over dust. It's just not going to stick. So with an acrylic clear, you could probably get away with a Scotch-Brite and then clear over, because it's a bit more flexible. But with 2-pack, I've got to go back to what I call a stable base, something that you can actually paint over and it's not going to cause you issues down the track. So essentially I'm just going to have to sand a little harder at it with a coarser grit. I'm going to drop back from an 800 grit back to a 600, and if that still seems to be gliding over it rather than cutting the oxidization off, then I'll drop back to a 400. And that's wet, 400 wet. And also on the automotive side of things, there's 2 different types of paper. There's silicon carbide, which is wet, which is grey, and aluminium oxide. Now you'll find they're not the same. If you've got a 400 in one and a 400 in the other, wet is always coarser. To give you a general rule of thumb, a 600 in a wet is generally equivalent to a 400 in a dry, because when you're sanding dry, the dust clogs the grit a little bit and you don't quite get as deep as scratches. So I'm going to go to a 600 in a wet paper. Anyway, now you're sandpaper experts, let's get back to sanding. So I've gone around and rubbed it all with a little bit of help from the kids too, which was good. And that's why I say it's a good place to learn. Even your kid can pitch in and have a bit of a scuff. There's no real right or wrong. Now I'm going to pull all these old Bailey channels out and all the old weather strips off and go around all the edges with Scotch-Brite, and also go around all the stainless with Scotch-Brite, because I'll clean the stainless now with Scotch-Brite, so I'm not trying to, avoid touching the clear later on. And why I'm taking the weather strips and Baileys out is, number one, they're rooted, and I'm going to replace them. But two, if the clear is going to peel, that's where it's going to peel. It'll be where you haven't rubbed on an edge or something like that. So I'll get them out, really scotch down the edges hard, clean up the stainless, give him a pressure clean, and then he's ready to start masking. So I've had a couple of trying moments with these badges. With these badges you can sort of get a screwdriver, a flat screwdriver up behind and just slowly work them off. And the guards come off real easy, but this one did not. It's actually snapped the pin off there. And on that type of badge it's not the end of the world, because you can put double-sided tape and then just pop him back on. But on this side it's not really the case. I can't really put double-sided tape on the back of that one if I break it. So I had the screwdriver behind and it's flexing and moving and I could just see it breaking, and so I've got it just out from the panel. And I'm just going to slip paper up behind it and rub it like that, scuff it down behind the top and bottom, and then I'm just going to clear coat it the way it is on there, and then just wipe the the badge with thinners to get the clear coat off. So if I snap the pins on that one, it's really going to be a pain to try and get double-sided tape on the tiny little bits to get that to stick. So I'm just going to leave him there. Well, I know I didn't do a lot of talking, that was a lot of time lapse, but after all, I do say just stop talking and get into it. But essentially that was just the day sanding, clean off all the stainless, pressure clean it, dried it, and now it's masked. And I've been busting to try and get it done today, and now's not really the time I should be clear coating it. I generally use an acrylic clear. They dry very fast. It's really hot in the afternoon at the minute, but I'm not going to use acrylic, and that's the only reason I'm going to clear it right now rather than wait until the cool morning. With the acrylic, if it's too hot, it dries super quick and you get a really dry finish. And because we're not buffing it, you want the finish to be the finished product. Well, I want this one to be glossy and very obvious that it's been clear coated. I want this one really to pop and to stand out. So I'm using a 2-pack. Now normally with 2-pack paints, they're done in a spray booth for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's the dust particles floating around in the air. The 2-pack dries a lot slower, and so those dust particles stick and you get what's called a little nib or a bit of shit that you've got to sort of sand out and buff up later. It's a patina car and it's clear. You're not going to see it, so I don't care. And I've got the redneck spray booth going, and by that I mean there's a gentle breeze. And the second reason a lot of the 2-packs are done in a spray booth is the health risk side of things. But I'm using what's called an ISO-free or an isocyanate-free 2-pack. So this will air dry overnight, and that'll allow me to start putting the interior back in the morning. Anyway, like I said, stop talking and let's get into it. Oh, one more thing. With 2-packs, use a tack rag. I'm going to go over that with a wax and grease remover. And then what a tack rag is it just picks up the little fine particles of dust. Probably won't matter that much here, but I'm going to do it anyway, just to try and get a nicer finish. All right, let's get into it. As I said, total wrong time to be doing it, right in the afternoon. The sun's going down, so I'm just trying to rotate the back of it towards the sun. The front panels that were facing the sun, they're almost touch dry. Ooh, she's almost done. What I mean touch dry, you can just touch it, you go pushing your thumb in it, you're going to leave a fingerprint. But that's good enough for me. That's about as shiny as you're going to get in your driveway. And durable now with that ISO-free 2-pack. But that was bust and hump for 2 days. But I just wanted to get through it so I can start putting it back together, because now we can get the carpet in. I'm still tossing up whether to put new trims in it. It might deserve it now, but we can start with the other side of it. Anyway, first thing in the morning, we'll get stuck into this interior, get the carpet in, start putting some seats back in, and oh, and Bailey channels and weather strips too. We'll start whacking them back in. Got plenty to do. The Arvo sun's just about gone, and that's about 3 hours of drying time. And she's done. And I do love how that came out. I actually can't wait to get the wheels on it. I won't unmask it just yet. I'll wait till morning. We'll get that interior in and then start on the fun bit. I'll see you in the morning. All unmasked. Time to start on the inside. I'll get all my masking out of there. Get the floor blacked and the drains back in, and I think we'll start with the carpet, seats, and then get onto the Bailey channels, weather strips, and yeah, let's get it back together. So let's just black the floor, and it's nothing elaborate. It's just an underbody black with a rust inhibitor in it. And realistically, unless water's going to get in here, you probably don't even need to do anything. It survived 50 years without a rust hole, and there's not a rust hole in it. So unless we let water in here, really didn't even need that. That's only just to have a nice, clean, fresh base. And I got some dark chocolate carpet for this guy. It didn't have any carpet in it when I got it. So I don't know whether it was tan or whether it was dark chocolate. It was probably tan, but I just wanted to go a bit darker. Anyway, we'll get this carpet in. So before I put the carpet in up front, I was installing these little fellas back in the floor. There's 4 in the front, 2 in the back, but I actually come up 1 short. There's 2 here, but I only had 1 left. But check this out. I'm re-putting the seats in, and don't worry about that shit. We're just going to cover that with a seat cover. And I'm down here doing my bolts up, and I look over there. Found ya. How I missed that, I don't know, but I must have had that folded back when I was pressure cleaning or something, and I didn't see that, but it's obviously got chucked on the seat like that and then just made its way down there. But that's good. Now I'm not missing one. That's the window that was in the back, and you'll see what I mean by green glass. I thought it was the same when you got it out and sat it next to it. It's got a real green tinge to it, but this is the runner here on the bottom of the window. You'll see on that glass it's missing. It's because it's still in the door and it's still attached to the window winder mechanism. So we'll get that undone, get that guy out, and then we've got to re-stick it along there to that window. Oh, and Mucus is up next. He's 9 inches turned up. And I got him a little bit shorter too, just to tuck those big bags in a bit. So to give you an idea what's going on here, I'm doing the Bailey channels, which is this section in your door here and here. but I'm not going to pull the whole door apart. I'm just going to loosen these two up here and one down the bottom, just right down the bottom there. There's a runner that runs down here, which the window slides up and down, and if you undo them and loosen that bracket and shift it over, you can actually create enough movement for the window to go that way, so you can slide your Bailey channel down this section here. And the other thing is, when you're coming in with a weather strip on the other side, this guy is fixed and there's a bolt just there. Undo that, that'll allow that to come back so you can get your weather strip down and in, but I'll show you that in a second. So all we're doing, as I said, get that window loose so that can move, slide your Bailey channel in and grab it, just slide it down. And the other little screw I'm saying is take him out of there, and that holds this guy in here. So if you watch that gap there, when I pull it over, it just gives you enough flex to be able to get the weather strip, which is this guy. It'll just give you enough flex to get him down there, and then get these clips down. If you see, they clip into these little holes, but you've got to get this back far enough to get him down and into that hole there. All right, let's keep going. Anyway, so the two back doors are done. That is door trims back on, door rubbers, new weather strips, everything's lubed up so it works. Oh, and Bailey channels. We did the Bailey channels too. So rubbers, weather strips, Bailey channels. So they seal up a bit better now. You can actually hear it now when you shut it. It feels nicer, sounds nicer. New rubber, feels firmer. Weather strips so we don't have water going down into the bottoms of the doors. Bottoms of the doors I fish oiled while I had the trims off it, obviously, because they're mint. Like there's a little dent there where, I don't know, maybe it's going to form into something, but whatever it's fish oiled, it won't. And inside the doors here is good. And that right hand rear window winder mechanism, it tested me. It took me a little while to figure out what was going on with it. So why that door was posing me such a pain is one of the little rollers on the mechanism that winds your window down was actually seized up, and the little runner that it runs along had actually sort of bent from the force somebody tried to wind it down hard, and I didn't realise the arm was bent until about the third time I tried to put it together. But anyway, that's sorted now. But those type of jobs, I think you've got to walk away from, do something else, come back with a clear head. I've done that one, but I think I'm going to pull up on the doors right now and give myself a little treat and whack the wheels on. I've chose a really old school style wheel, but with a bit of a modern kicker. They're a little bit taller than your average, you know, old school 15s. But anyway, I'll put them on, have a look, and then I'll get back to the doors after that. So the bit that was giving me grief on the back door were these fellas here. One of them was bound up, so I wasn't sliding, so somebody forced it really hard and actually bent one of the arms that slide in these grooves. But that's the front passenger side. She's right to go in, so I'll chuck him in as well. So we're putting on the door rubber, right? But that isn't the shape of a door. So how do you know where to start. Well, see these little holes where the clips go in all the way around the door? It's not so obvious on the front doors, but these two are closer together. And on the back doors, it's even more obvious because you can see those two there are very close together. Well, that's where you start. So you just find on the rubber where the two are closer together, which is here, and that's where you start. That guy starts there. And generally, if they're a decent aftermarket rubber, they'll actually have a diagram of which way the profile goes. With the Kiwis, it's that ridge there, goes to the inside. See on the front there you've got these clips, and on the back you can see the back of the clip there. So sit your weather strip down in the channel and line up the clips with the groove. So then put your screwdriver at the back of that clip and you'll hear it click in. Just end of the screwdriver, back of the clip. Like that. And you'll hear it click in. So you come across screws like this, 50-year-old, head's not great, and you look at them going, well, they're going to ruin my day, because the minute you try and twist on that, it's going to strip the guts out of that, and that's where it's going to stay. Then you're drilling it out. Try this. First of all, clean out the head as best you can, of course. Then just a little bit of penetration spray under him. Rather than trying to undo it straight away and stripping the back shoulder, push in and just crack it in tighter, and that way when it cracks its rusty little seal, you can then work it backwards and just ever so slightly just rock forward and back, forward and back. Don't try and undo it, just rock just like that. And every time you're rocking forward and back, just get a little wider and a little wider and a little wider, and that allows all that rust and shit on the I'll show you. And that allows all that shitty rust on the end of that to drop off, or to be washed away by the spray. So we just rock back and forward, back and forward. And if you feel like, if it starts to tighten up again, and just do the same process. Don't try and undo it. Just rock it in and out. Remember, that's been there for 50 years. Don't be scared to take 5 minutes to get one screw. It's going to take you 25 minutes to go and find one to replace it. And if you find it's binding up, go completely back in. Just allows all that rust to drop away. I think I've got that now. Yep. I got all of them out without destroying one. I mean, look at that head. There's no way you're thinking, oh yeah, I'll get that out. It's pretty shit. But not only is it out, it's gone back in. And yeah, I know, I should have pulled that off prior to clear coating, but I was busy, I forgot. But anyway, the other thing is that paintwork hasn't seen sunlight, so it'll be fine. I'll just clean that up, get the new weather strip on. So now with the interior all back together, I think we need to do something about this gap here and this gap here. Might try and get him to sit down a little bit neater over those wheels. I don't want to go super low with it because I think I'm going to run into issues with this guard touching that tyre, because these guys are probably offset an inch out further than I would have liked. I didn't order these brand new. These are a marketplace special, but I like the look of them on the car, so I just ran with it. If I was ordering them brand new, I would have the backs an inch further in so you could go down a bit more. But nonetheless, let's get him to sit a bit better over that rear tyre. So we'll start with the rear and we'll see what we've got to work with. To me that looks like about 55 mils to the top of the tyre. And she's pretty even. If anything, it's a fraction higher, but that could be because of that mongy guard. It could be a little bit bent, but that's roughly the same, about 55 mil. So I reckon I only want probably 20 out of that to put the guard about there, and that'll still give me a little bit of room for the tyre to clear, but it'll just tuck that tyre up just a fraction more. So I'll see if we can't get 20, maybe 25 mil out of it. So underneath, he's surface rusty, but it's as solid as it shows on the outside. Exhaust's a bit shitty and that bracket's broken, but like it looked from the inside, she's surface rusty, but it is solid. And that trans hasn't started leaking. I topped it up. Oh, maybe it has. A little weep around that back seal there. Anyway, let's get back to the springs. So I'll knock these shocks out, and that'll allow the diff to come down a bit to dislodge those springs. And you'll see on this guy, it's actually got two springs. There's an inner and an outer. Standard vehicles only generally have the one, but I'd say they've upgraded that little spring on the inside as a helper for when they put this amazing tow bar on there. So we'll knock them out, drop those springs out, and then we've got a couple of options with this guy. Shocks are off, and normally there's nothing holding this spring in. There's just a lip on the bottom and a locating bump at the top, and the tighter coil just fits down around that, and then the weight of the car keeps it in position. But because of this little helper spring, if you see here, can you see there? There's a nut. And there's actually one up there as well. And that's got a bar running across it here, and that's holding the two in. So we're going to undo those nuts on the bottom initially, and I'll see if I can then get the big spring out of the way, or whether or not I've got to take that top guy off as well. But we'll start undoing them. So we've got options. That's obviously the spring that just came out with the little helper spring in the middle. That is actually the standard coil out of the white HQ sedan, and they're roughly the same height, but that looks like it's thinner, so that's obviously going to compress a little, so that might give us a bit. That is the spring that came out of Mucus before we put new springs in him. And so I reckon that's the guy I'm going to put in, because I don't want it as low as that. I measured from the center of the wheel to the guard, and it's going to be way too much. But if for whatever reason that's not enough, I have a second set of springs. So like I say, I think that's the way I'll go. That's the guy that came out of Mucus, and It is an aftermarket spring. I'm not sure what brand paints their springs blue, but that's under all that black, that's a blue spring. And if that doesn't go low enough, we've always got the new super lows and also new shocks, which it's strange that I have a brand new set of springs and shocks, but when I ordered Mucus's springs and shocks, somehow 2 turned up, which I can't imagine it'd be me clicking the button twice. I'm pretty regimental with my ordering. I finish for the day and then I sit down and go through my ordering. So I'd say it was probably a clerical error at their end, not this end. So that's down on the ground, and that did absolutely nothing. Even if they settle in 10 mil, you know, once they settle in on that pad, that's done nothing. So makes the decision easy. I put the new ones in. But I am apprehensive because those new ones made a big difference to Mucus, so we'll just have to see. These ones are actually that short that once you get it to there and you just heard it pop, you got to get under there and make sure it's in the saddle. I don't know about you, but I'm chucking shocks in that and calling that pretty done. That's probably gone a little bit further than what I expected, probably a little bit further than I wanted to, but the guards are clearing, so I'm not going to hate on myself too hard for that one. And to be honest, I don't mind a little bit of a rake to the back, so it's a little bit up in the nose like it's leaving the line when it's standing still. However, I've got a couple of bushes to do in the front end, so I've got to have those control arms off anyway. So I think I might just take, say, 10 or 15 mil out of the front and just bring that down a little as well. If you see these bushes here are shot and there, so if I undo that control arm, I've got to undo the ball joint out wider to take that control arm off, and if I've done that, I've got access to the spring because that bottom control arm is actually going to fall down. If you see that ball joint there, I've got to undo that guy to get that control arm out. So if that's undone, that allows the lower control arm to swing right down, gives me access to that spring. So I think I'll take 10, maybe 15 out of them. Oh, maybe a little more, maybe 20 mil. We'll see. We'll see what we can get out of them. So I'm going to get a bit cheeky on the front of this one. Before I go start pulling the car apart, I have another set of control arms. So I'm going to clean them up, get them all bushed up and ball jointed up. Then I'll start pulling this guy apart. So this is your control arm, right? And we've got to remove these bushes. They're actually pushed in that way, and obviously another one in that way. Firstly, you undo these top nuts, and you see we're going to get this bush out. It's got a top lip like that, That's there, and basically just pop him out. The thing is, and there's a ton of different ways you can do that. I've seen people literally hit them with a torch, just burn the rubber so it's left with the outer case, and then punch the case out. You can get presses, press from this end, press that out. But the simplest way I find to get those out is get an air chisel and put it under that edge like that, and then just work your way around. Some from that side, some from that side, and just keep going around. So first thing we're going to do is heat the control arm, because if you heat it, it expands, and hopefully that'll let go. That's called an interference fit. It means it's pressed in there. So if you heat one, chill the other. We'll get to that in a minute. So I'm going to heat him up. Then get your air chisel, turn the compressor up to beast mode. Hit him under that edge there. Wasn't time lapse, that took what? There's the compressor. I'll just let him finish. We're obviously still having our war, but clearly I need him there. While that compressor's running, I'll flip him over. So, like I said, that wasn't time lapse. You saw literally, that's how long that took to get out. That is the easiest way I know to get them out. Oh, and that's hot. Do I burn myself in every episode? It's fucking still hot too. How many times are you gonna do that? Compress the... and that is really hot. You know, might have been hot. There's a possibility having just been welded. The bracket was enormously hot. What the fuck? Why would you try and put the return spring in? You just welded it. And you won't believe it, it's still hot. Maybe that's a new sticker. Get fucked, that's hot. So, round two. Forgot to heat it. Here I was getting ahead of myself. I forgot to heat it. And that just shows you the difference of heating it and not heating it. I got too excited, it was going too well, had to mess it up. So once those guys are out, I've repositioned it in the vise, and we're now going to get these fellas. They're actually a stud. They're pushed in and then compressed on the top from factory, so there's no nut, that's actually pressed flat to hold them in. So we're going to grind the tops of these off. And yes, I didn't at the time, but I now see where my sparks were going, and I am an idiot. All over the bonnet of the EH. However, I got away with that one. Hasn't actually marked it. Doesn't mean I'm not an idiot. So those rivets, I think I called them studs before, but I guess you call them rivets. I've just ground the top off them, and you can't really see where they are. So what we'll do now is heat the top of that ball joint. Just get your chisel and whack under that edge there until you can see a circle where every rivet head is. But you can see just there now, there's a little circle. That's when, oh, there's a better one. And there, you can just see that circle there. So now you get this little fella and you hammer him just in the middle of that circle. And that one's pushed completely out. That one's sunk a mile, and these two have been a bit troublesome, but you don't need to completely knock them out. Once you've got it to that point, you can put your chisel in under this guy again, and that'll actually pop that off, and then you deal with the rivets after that. So that back one was a bit pesky, but that's not uncommon, because if you think of it, the way the control arm sits, that's the deepest part. That's where the moisture is going to sit and whatever. I might not have ground it off far enough, but I think it was just a bit more heavily rusted just looking at it. But that's the old ball joint. She's out. Now you're left with the heads of these rivets. Rather than just trying to hammer them back through, what's actually probably going to happen is that rivet, if you try and bash it back through, it's going to spread and then it won't come through. So take your grinder with a fine wheel, like a 1mm cut wheel, and just nip them off. So once you've cut the heads off, just really gently grind down till you got a flat surface there. Obviously try not to dig into your control arm too much, and then we'll get the center punch and just punch them out. And because the reason you do that is so that there's no lip around the top there, so when you hit it with the center punch, they're going to pop straight out. And then now if you really give us stuff, you get one of those flapper discs and just polish all that back up around there and make it all pretty. Oh, right, so now I've made myself feel like I don't give a stuff. Right, I'll just do it. So get one of these bad boys. And get any little grinding marks and polish them all up. All the chisel marks that are on that edge and that sort of thing. We'll get him cleaned up and we'll start putting it all back together. So there's a couple of different ways of putting the bushes back in. You can use a press him in that way. First thing, like I said, start with, cool that guy. The best way to chill them down, just chuck them in your freezer. Don't forget your merchandise at backshed.net.au and heat that guy up. So the difference is he's 24 degrees. It's 71. So all we're going to do is not touch that. That's your bush. You're going to get a big socket on the inside so the bush slides into it, and another big socket on this side covering your rubber. Now if you don't have that going in this way, you can actually just use a piece of timber. I've done it with just a vise. Just be careful you don't tear that. But say a socket that side, and you see there, just wind him in. And as long as you've heated that nicely and chilled that guy, it won't even take a lot of force. That's one in. Now here's the point. That guy's got to go in, because if you get that other bush in, it ain't going to go in. So it's going to come in through there. And I've wire wheeled that up and put just a dab of grease on it. If nothing else, just to stop surface rust. You know, maybe to slide through that bush a little easier. And that's one side in. Then you just push that guy in as well. That does make it a little bit harder to do in the vise once that guy is in, so I'll show you another way. And so the other way to get it in is just a little press like this, and it's not an expensive or elaborate one. Just sit your bush on. Prop your control arm up if you need to, chock him. And I've got a little tool that I made up. It's just a piece of pipe with a flat piece of checker plate on. You pop that guy on. And these aren't dear, they're not expensive. And they're a little portable one, you can move it around the shed. Tuck it in the corner when you're not using it. And right about that point, my battery went flat. But you didn't miss much. I'll show you on the old control arm the only bit you missed. As you start pressing that down, you'll find that this control arm will flex some. And you just get an old piece of pipe, just cut in half, and you support between there. And then that will stop the flex there, and you push it in. But if you don't have a press, don't stress out. This tool's the one you need, and we'll go back to the vise. So just get the control arm like that, chuck it in the vise, and you're supporting the base of the control arm. Then just get your tool, plop it on, and tap it down. As long as you're quite careful, see the bush has got a metal edge around it, and as long as your tool fits nicely around that edge, you won't damage it. It'll just tap down nicely. So bushes are in, onto the ball joint. So going back into the vise, and I think I did this before in about episode maybe 11 or something like that, but I got asked to go through a bit more detail, so I guess that's what we're doing now. But these guys are bolt in. If you remember, the factory one was riveted. Yeah, the aftermarket, they bolt them in. They come in from the top, bolt comes up from underneath. I don't think there's any particular way it has to be. I just like the thread on the upside, and do put a bit of Loctite on it. So that's that. Ball joint in, bushes in, ready for some paint. Alright, they're all painted up. And as I said, while we're out, I'm going to take a little bit out of these springs. They're about 40 mils there. I'll check the other side. And I've got about 45 that side. And we did exactly the same on the white HQ sedan, so I might go back and have a look how much we took out of the front coils, because it's the same setup, same engine setup, stock ride height. I'll see how much I cut out of them, and I might go off that as a guide. Alright, stop talking and we'll get him on the hoist. So there's nothing overly extravagant about what we're going to do here. I'm literally going to undo that bolt there and that one over there, and that will give this arm the ability to come out. Obviously this bracket's going to come off as well. And then under here, all we're really doing is undoing that ball joint and then swinging this down. Now I'm going to undo a little bit more than that in the sway bar and this brake line, because I want to get that spring out, so shock's coming out as well. So basically all I've done there to release that ball joint is use a ball joint separator. It puts pressure on the bottom of the castellated nut and goes in between the ball joint itself. Tighten him down to there's a fair bit of pressure on it, and just give him a tap there. Bang. That's it. You can see the gap there, it's separated. Bear in mind there's a spring there, and when you take that off it's going to want to go that way, so you either have to support down here as you take that off. And that's why I've got him nice and low to the ground, so I can actually put a trolley jack here and just support that, take the weight, take the nut off and gently lower it down. So with the spring out, we'll give these a bit of a trim. And as I've said in previous episodes, I say a trim because I'm only taking a small amount out. If you want to go super low, get a increased rate stiffer spring, because the more you cut off these, it doesn't change how they compress and you'll bottom out and all sorts of ugly shit like that. But I'm kind of lucky in this respect, because I've done this exact thing on the white HQ back in episode 11. Same 6-cylinder, same spring, same ride height, except it's a wagon. I can go back and watch my old video and know exactly how much to take off got me how much. 3/4 of a coil to about there. So there's half, 3/4 of a coil, gave me 40 mil. So we had roughly 40 on the other side and 45 on this side. So that was a lot of numbers quickly. And just to clarify, from the old video, I took 3/4 of the coil, it gave me exactly 40 mil. But I've only got 40 to 45 mil total till the tire is flush with the guard. So I don't want to take all of it on this one. So I'm actually going to back it off a bit, maybe cut a half a coil or just over, and hopefully that'll give me 25, 30 mil. It'll leave 10 or 15 between the top of that tire and the guard, because I did kind of like that little rake to the front in this one. So that's out, and we're about maybe 30, 40 minutes in, and that's ready to go back in. So I can now whack that on, trim that spring, and we're going back together. It's kind of why I like having a spare set of these laying around. Just makes it a lot quicker. Anyway, stop talking. So they're out, new ones are back in, all buttoned up. I just put the wheel alignment shims back where they were. Still going to have to get a wheel on because we've lowered it down. And she's all buttoned up except for one last thing. I put the brake line back together. I completely took the brake lines off, so that way when the disc and the controller I'm hanging down here, you're not hanging it off this. And initially I'd looked at that and thought, I think that's been replaced. But take a look under here. I'm actually starting to think this is a low kilometre car. That's an original tie rod. Still got paint on it. Still got marker paint on it. And there, that's an original tie rod end. Still okay. And same with over there. They're all fine. And even these guys that I pulled out, they weren't that bad. Sure, I ripped them up a bit removing them, but realistically they would have passed rego if I wasn't doing those bushes. So I'm actually starting to think that says 49,754, and that's in kilometers too. It might not be 49, but I'm thinking maybe 149, probably 249. One thing when you're doing springs like that, don't drop it off the jack or the hoist, measure it and go, hey, that made no difference, because they will actually take a little while to settle in, especially if you've had the suspension drooped. I don't know if you can see it there, but that wheel looks like it's angled back that way, because as you lift them up, they drop, and when they hit the ground, they want to settle out, but they can't. So they're going to tuck up, and it's like they got their shoulders like that and they can't relax. So I'm actually going to take that for a little drive, although I feel way too filthy now. This thing is really clean inside, so I feel a bit filthy to get into it, but I'll just try not to touch anything, I guess. And we'll go for a drive, settle that in, and we'll see where we ended up. Just quiet for a minute, Riley. I'll be back. I bet you can't hear me for fucking wind. Start again. That was fucked. Emotional roller coaster. Start that again because you said roller coaster. Shut up, birds. Silly. Burp right. Have a burp right in the middle. It was a pretty good beer, that one though. That does look frigging fantastic to me. I don't know why it's called Bailey's Channel. Probably named after some bloke that invented its dog or something. Now the reason I'm not using that straight up, there isn't actually a reason, because that's now low enough. And just like that, my birds are gone. It's like their summer vacation. They come for a month, drive me nuts, figure my work here is done, and piss off. Fuck you birds, dead set, you are killing me. Don't miss them. That's it for another one, and I really did enjoy that one. And do hit the buttons and stick around. We've got a couple of new cars coming up and some old favourites are back shortly. So I'll see you next time, and thanks for watching.